Imagine living 18 years without hearing your own voice, your own laughter, the sound of rain against windows. Imagine building your entire life around a truth that was never true at all. Charlotte Wynne was 6 years old when doctors told her father she was deaf. Victor Wynne, one of the wealthiest men in the country, spared no expense on specialists, treatments, and a silent world designed just for her. But when a widowed handyman named Anders Hall came to fix up the family's old estate, he brought along his daughter Erin, a speech therapist with a gift for seeing what others miss. What Erin discovered would change everything Charlotte thought she knew about herself. What if someone you trusted had stolen 18 years of sound from your life? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the conservatory windows in soft golden streams, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Charlotte Wynne sat at her easel, brush poised over canvas, watching the way the light transformed the ordinary into something luminous. She'd been awake since dawn, as she was most mornings, finding solace in the predictable rhythm of her days. At 24, Charlotte had learned to navigate her silent world with grace and precision. Her routine was clockwork: wake at 6, morning yoga in the East Wing studio, breakfast alone in the sunroom, then painting until lunch. The Wynne estate sprawled across 40 acres of Connecticut countryside, a monument to her father's success and her own gilded isolation. She dipped her brush into cerulean blue, mixing it with white until she achieved the exact shade of a winter sky she remembered from childhood. Memory was funny that way. She could recall colors with perfect clarity, the way sunlight felt on her skin, the smell of her mother's perfume. But sound? Sound existed only as a concept, something other people experienced that she could only imagine through vibration and visual cues. Her leather-bound journal lay open beside her easel, filled with sketches and written observations. It was her constant companion, the way she communicated with the world. She'd filled dozens of them over the years, each one a window into her interior life that few people ever glimpsed. The conservatory door opened. Charlotte sensed the change in air pressure, the way the light shifted as someone entered. She turned to find Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper who'd been with the family since before Charlotte was born. The older woman's face was kind, weathered by 60-some years of life and loyalty. Mrs. Pemberton held up a note. "Your father called. He'll be home tonight. Dinner at 7. Charlotte nodded, returning to her canvas. Victor Wynne was always calling, always scheduling, always controlling the parameters of her existence from whatever hotel or office or boardroom he currently occupied. He built skyscrapers and shopping centers, accumulated wealth and power, and returned home to ensure his daughter remained safely contained within the world he'd constructed for her. She loved him. Of course she loved him. He was all she had. Her mother had left when Charlotte was 6, shortly after the diagnosis. That's what her father told her anyway. Diane couldn't handle having a disabled child, couldn't bear the burden of Charlotte's silence, and so she'd simply walked away, left without a goodbye, without a forwarding address, without a backward glance. Charlotte had been too young to understand abandonment, but old enough to feel it. The loss had settled into her bones, a permanent ache she'd learned to carry. Mrs. Pemberton touched her shoulder gently before leaving. Charlotte appreciated the woman's discretion. She never hovered, never treated Charlotte as fragile. She simply existed as a steady presence in an otherwise unpredictable world. By afternoon, Charlotte had finished the painting. A landscape of the estate grounds in winter, bare trees reaching toward a pale sky. She cleaned her brushes methodically, enjoying the ritual of it when movement outside the window caught her attention. A truck was pulling up the circular drive, an older model with faded paint and tools visible in the bed. A man emerged, tall and solid, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades of honest work. He moved with quiet confidence, surveying the exterior of the guest cottage with a professional eye. Anders Hall, Charlotte remembered. Her father had mentioned hiring someone to renovate the guest cottage, which had fallen into disrepair over the years. She watched him retrieve a measuring tape and notebook, making notes as he walked the perimeter of the building. There was something different about him, something that made Charlotte pause in her observation. Most of the people who came to the estate, her father's business associates, the carefully vetted tutors and specialists, the few family friends who still maintained contact, carried themselves with a certain affected polish. They were performative in their interactions with her, either overly solicitous or artificially casual. This man seemed unbothered by pretense. He simply did his work, measuring and noting, occasionally crouching to examine the foundation or peering up at the roofline. Charlotte found herself reaching for her journal, sketching his profile quickly. Artist's instinct, nothing more. But there was something about the set of his shoulders, the patient way he examined each detail, that spoke of integrity. That evening, Victor returned as promised. Charlotte heard, felt, the Mercedes pull up, the heavy front door opening and closing. She descended the main staircase to find her father in the foyer, removing his coat while speaking into his phone. He held up one finger to her. Wait. She waited. Victor Wynne was 53, but could pass for younger. His dark hair only lightly threaded with silver, his suits expertly tailored to his frame. He worked out with a personal trainer, ate carefully, and carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who'd never been told no. When he finally ended his call, he smiled at Charlotte, the smile he reserved only for her, warm and genuine. He pulled her into a brief embrace, and she caught the scent of his cologne, expensive and subtle. He stepped back, signing as he spoke. Her father had learned sign language for her, along with everything else. He'd spared no expense in her education. The finest tutors, specialists in lip reading and communication, art instructors who understood how to teach a deaf student. Everything she needed contained within the estate's walls. "How are you, sweetheart?" his hands asked. She signed back. "Good. Finished a new painting today. I'd love to see it after dinner." They ate in the formal dining room, an absurdly large space for two people. Mrs. Pemberton served them while Victor talked, his hands moving gracefully through the air, telling her about his latest acquisition, a struggling property in Boston that he'd transformed into luxury condominiums. Charlotte watched his hands, read his lips, and nodded at appropriate moments. She'd become expert at these performances, at being the attentive daughter who asked the right questions and expressed appropriate interest in his world. But part of her mind wandered to the man outside, to Anders Hall, measuring and noting, moving through his work with quiet competence. She wondered what it would be like to build things instead of just painting them, to work with your hands, creating something solid and real. After dinner, Victor walked with her to the conservatory to view her latest painting. He studied it thoughtfully, hands clasped behind his back. "Beautiful," he signed. "You have your mother's talent." It was the only acknowledgement he ever made of Diane, that Charlotte had inherited her artistic ability. Everything else about her mother was locked away, a subject too painful to discuss. "The contractor started today," Victor continued. "Anders Hall. His work comes highly recommended. The cottage should be finished in 6 weeks, Charlotte nodded. 6 weeks of watching someone transform the neglected building into something new. The thought pleased her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. That night, alone in her bedroom, Charlotte sat by the window and watched the guest cottage in the distance. A single light burned inside. Anders must be taking measurements or planning his approach. She imagined the sound of a hammer, of wood being cut and fitted together, of transformation happening one careful step at a time. She opened her journal and wrote, "Sometimes I wonder what I'm missing. Not just sounds, but the fullness of life that happens outside these walls. Is this all there is? Is this enough?" The questions felt dangerous, disloyal even. Her father had given her everything, built an entire world around her needs and limitations. What right did she have to want more? But the wanting was there anyway, a small, persistent ache that no amount of comfort could quite soothe. Erin Hall had her mother's eyes and her father's steady disposition. At 28, she'd built a respected career as a speech therapist, specializing in neurological communication disorders that other practitioners found too challenging or too heartbreaking. She'd seen her share of tragedy, strokes that stole language, accidents that damaged the delicate machinery of speech, children born with conditions that made every word a victory. Her mother's death 5 years ago had taught her something about loss and resilience. Cancer had taken Patricia Hall slowly, giving them time to say everything that needed saying. Erin had held her mother's hand through the final weeks, when speech became difficult and then impossible, when they communicated through touches and glances. She'd learned that connection transcended words, but she'd also learned how precious voice truly was. Now she pulled up the long drive of the Wynne estate, her father's tools rattling in the back of her sedan. Anders had asked her to help with initial measurements, but Erin suspected he also wanted company. He'd been quieter since her mother's passing, more solitary. This project, restoring a historic guest cottage on a grand estate, had sparked something in him she hadn't seen in years. The estate was magnificent, old money translated into manicured grounds and architectural grandeur. The main house was Georgian colonial, all symmetry and restraint, while the guest cottage showed romantic Victorian influences that had suffered from decades of neglect. Anders emerged from the cottage as she parked, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked good, she thought, purposeful. This was exactly what he needed. "Thanks for coming," he said, embracing her briefly. "I could use your eye on the interior space planning. Happy to help, though I'm pretty sure you don't actually need me. Maybe I just wanted to see my daughter." They worked together for an hour, measuring rooms and discussing possibilities. Anders had a vision for the space, restoring its original character while modernizing the systems. He talked about crown molding and window restoration with the enthusiasm of an artist describing a canvas. "The owner's daughter might use this as a studio eventually," Anders mentioned. "She's a painter." Deaf since childhood, Erin's professional interest was immediately piqued. "What kind of deafness?" "Not sure of the details. Diagnosed young, from what Victor mentioned." "Why?" "Just curious. It's my field, you know." They finished the measurements, and Anders suggested she take a walk around the grounds while he made some calls. Erin wandered toward the main house, admiring the gardens, even in their late autumn dormancy. She could imagine them in spring, an explosion of carefully planned color. She was examining a dormant rose garden when she noticed someone in the conservatory. A young woman sat at an easel, completely absorbed in her work. Even from a distance, Erin could see the intensity of her focus, the way her whole body engaged with the act of creation. Erin moved closer, not wanting to intrude but curious. The woman was striking, dark hair pulled back loosely, elegant features, an unself-conscious grace in her movements. She wore paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, somehow making the casual outfit look refined. The woman must have sensed her presence because she turned suddenly, eyes widening slightly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other through the glass. Erin raised her hand in a small wave, then signed, "Sorry, didn't mean to disturb you." The woman's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that might have been pleasure. She set down her brush and gestured for Erin to come inside. The conservatory was warmer than outside, humid with plant life and smelling of earth and paint. Erin entered carefully, aware she was crossing some threshold. "I'm Erin," she said, signing as she spoke. "Anders Hall's daughter. He's working on your cottage." The woman retrieved a notebook and wrote quickly, "Charlotte, nice to meet you. You sign?" "I'm a speech therapist. Part of the job." Charlotte's eyes lit up with interest. She wrote, "What kind?" "I specialize in neurological communication disorders. Aphasia, apraxia, dysarthria, conditions where the brain and speech don't quite connect the way they should." Charlotte wrote for longer this time. "That must be fascinating work. And heartbreaking." "Both," Erin agreed. She moved closer to look at the painting on Charlotte's easel, a winter landscape rendered in subtle blues and grays. "This is beautiful. The light is remarkable." Charlotte's smile was genuine, unguarded. She wrote, "Thank you. Light is easier than sound. I can see it." Something in that simple statement caught Erin's attention. Not the words themselves, but the way Charlotte had phrased it. She filed the observation away. They talked, or rather Charlotte wrote and Erin spoke, for nearly an hour. Charlotte asked about Erin's work, about her mother's death, about how she and Anders managed grief. Erin found herself answering honestly, drawn in by Charlotte's obvious intelligence and empathy. In turn, Charlotte shared about her art, her daily routines, the structured simplicity of her life. She mentioned her father with obvious affection, but also something Erin couldn't quite name. Duty, maybe. Or resignation. When were you diagnosed? Erin asked, trying to sound casual. Charlotte wrote, 6 years old. Sudden onset. They never determined the exact cause. Have you had recent evaluations? Technology has improved significantly in the last decade. My father says there's no point. The specialists were very thorough. Erin nodded, but her professional instincts were humming. Sudden onset deafness in childhood without clear cause was unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. And something about the way Charlotte described her experience felt off in ways Erin couldn't yet articulate. A bird hit the conservatory window behind Charlotte with a sudden thump. Charlotte flinched and turned before the sound could have registered visually. Just a fraction of a second, an unconscious response. Erin kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. That flinch suggested auditory processing, even if Charlotte wasn't consciously aware of it. Charlotte turned back, writing, "Bird? They do that sometimes? Yes, is it okay?" Charlotte crossed to the window, peering out. The bird had already flown away, just stunned. She returned to her notebook. They usually are. Just confused by the reflection. They talked for a while longer, but Erin found herself observing more than conversing. She noticed how Charlotte's pupils dilated at unexpected movements, how she positioned herself to have visual access to all entry points, how she seemed to track things that might have been sound-related. When Anders texted that he was ready to leave, Erin felt oddly reluctant to go. "Could I visit again?" she asked. "I'd love to see more of your work." Charlotte's smile was immediate and warm. She wrote, "I'd like that. It gets lonely here sometimes." The admission seemed to surprise Charlotte herself. She looked away, then back, and added, "Most people don't know how to talk to me." "You do. You make it easy," Erin said honestly. That evening, back at her apartment, Erin couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte. She pulled out her laptop and began researching sudden onset deafness in children, psychogenic hearing loss, conversion disorders. The literature was extensive and fascinating. She thought about Charlotte's flinch, about the phrase, "I can see light but not hear sound," about the gaps in her medical history. She thought about a 6-year-old losing her hearing suddenly, about a mother who left shortly after. Trauma, Erin thought. What if this wasn't biological at all? She picked up her phone to call her former professor, the one who specialized in psychogenic disorders, then hesitated. She was making assumptions based on one meeting. Charlotte deserved better than amateur diagnosis from a stranger. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with Charlotte's story, and that 18 years of silence might be built on a foundation of misunderstanding. Erin returned to the estate 3 days later, ostensibly to help Anders with cabinet measurements, but really because she couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte. She'd spent those 3 days reviewing literature on psychogenic deafness, conversion disorders, and childhood trauma responses. The more she read, the more convinced she became that Charlotte's case deserved a closer look. Anders noticed her preoccupation. "You've been quiet," he said as they worked in the cottage's gutted kitchen. "Something on your mind?" "The daughter. Charlotte. There's something about her case that doesn't add up." "Erin." Her father's tone held gentle warning. "She's not your patient." "I know. But Dad, sudden onset deafness at 6 with no clear cause. No recent evaluations? And I saw her react to a sound she couldn't have seen." Anders set down his measuring tape. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking her deafness might be psychogenic, trauma-induced. Her brain protecting her from something unbearable. That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a possibility that no one seems to have considered." Erin paused. "Her mother left right after the diagnosis. What if the timing isn't coincidental?" Anders studied his daughter with the patient expression she knew well. "And what do you plan to do with this theory?" "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe just spend time with her, observe. If I'm right, she deserves to know the truth. And if you're wrong, then I've made a friend who needs one. Anders nodded slowly. Be careful. Victor Wynne is protective of his daughter. Understandably so. I will be. She found Charlotte in the conservatory again, this time working on an abstract piece that seemed to dance with color and movement. Charlotte noticed her approach and lit up with obvious pleasure. She wrote quickly, "You came back." "I said I would. I wanted to see more of your work." Charlotte gestured to the canvases lining the conservatory walls, landscapes, portraits, abstracts. Each one showed remarkable technical skill and emotional depth. But it was the abstracts that caught Erin's attention. They seemed to move, to flow, almost as if Charlotte was trying to paint something she couldn't quite perceive. "These are incredible," Erin said, pointing to a piece that seemed to visualize sound waves. "What inspired this one?" Charlotte wrote, "Music, or what I imagine music might be. People try to describe it, vibrations, patterns, emotion. I try to paint what they describe. Have you ever experienced music before you lost your hearing?" Charlotte's hand hesitated over the notebook. "Then I don't remember. I was so young. Memory is strange that way. Sometimes we remember more than we realize." They settled into comfortable conversation, Charlotte writing and Erin speaking. Erin asked careful questions about Charlotte's childhood, her diagnosis, her education. Charlotte answered openly, seemingly grateful for genuine interest. "Did you have hearing tests recently?" Erin asked. "Not since I was 15. My father said there was no point. Nothing had changed. But technology has changed. New imaging techniques, better understanding of auditory processing disorders. Would you be interested in a consultation? Just to see what current medicine might offer?" Charlotte's expression grew uncertain. She wrote, "My father wouldn't like it. He says, I've been through enough tests. You're 24. It's your decision, not his." The words hung between them. Charlotte stared at what she'd written, then at Erin, something shifting in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. Before Charlotte could respond, Mrs. Pemberton appeared at the conservatory door. She looked troubled, her usual composure slightly fractured. She held up a note. "Charlotte, could I speak with you privately?" Charlotte glanced at Erin apologetically, then followed the housekeeper into the main house. Erin remained in the conservatory, studying Charlotte's paintings more closely. Each one told a story of someone trying to understand a world she couldn't fully access. The abstracts especially seemed to pulse with longing. When Charlotte returned 20 minutes later, her face was pale, her movements stiff. She wrote simply, "Mrs. Pemberton isn't feeling well. I should stay with her." "Of course. Is there anything I can do?" "No, thank you for coming." The dismissal was polite but firm. Erin left, but something about Charlotte's sudden change troubled her. Mrs. Pemberton hadn't looked ill. She'd looked upset. Over the following week, Erin visited the estate daily. Sometimes she helped Anders, sometimes she simply visited Charlotte. They fell into an easy rhythm. Charlotte would paint while Erin talked, sharing stories about her patients, her mother, her life. Charlotte listened with her whole body, her attention complete and generous. Erin began casual observations, professional assessments disguised as friendship. She'd drop a pen behind Charlotte when she wasn't looking. Charlotte would turn toward it. She'd speak while Charlotte's back was turned. Sometimes Charlotte would tense slightly, as if registering something. Nothing definitive but suggestive. One afternoon, Charlotte surprised her by asking about speech therapy techniques. She wrote, "How do you help people who've lost their ability to speak?" "It depends on the cause. For neurological issues, we work on neural pathway reconnection. For trauma-related cases, we address the psychological components first." "Trauma can make people unable to speak?" "Absolutely. The mind protects us in remarkable ways. Sometimes that protection becomes its own prison." Charlotte's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Can it make people unable to hear?" This was it, the opening Erin had been waiting for. She chose her words carefully. "Yes, it's called psychogenic deafness or conversion disorder. The auditory system functions normally, but the brain blocks conscious perception of sound, usually following severe trauma. How would you know? If someone had that instead of real deafness, Real deafness is real, whatever the cause, Erin said gently.
But there are signs.
Inconsistent responses to sound, pupils dilating at auditory stimuli, the timing of onset, often immediately following traumatic events. Charlotte set down her pen. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Charlotte, Erin said softly, what happened when you were 6? For a long moment Charlotte didn't move. Then she picked up her pen and wrote with shaking hands, My mother left. The same week I stopped hearing. My father says she couldn't handle having a deaf child. But sometimes I wonder if I stopped hearing because she left, or because of something else I can't remember. Have you ever asked your father about the details? He won't talk about it. He says it's too painful, that we should focus on moving forward. What if there's more to the story? What if understanding what happened could help you? Charlotte looked at Erin with such raw hope and fear that Erin's heart ached. Could you help me find out? Yes, but it won't be easy. Your father won't like it. I know. Charlotte wrote something else, then hesitated before showing Erin, I'm tired of living in silence. Not just the hearing, the not knowing, the gaps in my own history. Will you help me find the truth? Erin reached across and took Charlotte's hand. Yes, I promise. The next morning, Erin met with Dr. Helen Forsyth at a cafe an hour from the estate. Helen had been Erin's professor during graduate school, a specialist in psychogenic disorders who'd published extensively on conversion syndromes. She was in her 60s now, sharp-eyed and compassionate, with the kind of clinical wisdom that only came from decades of careful practice. Erin explained Charlotte's case without using names, sketching the essential details. Sudden onset deafness at 6, mother's departure, controlling father. No recent evaluations, inconsistent responses to auditory stimuli. Helen listened, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more interested. When Erin finished, she sat back thoughtfully. It certainly presents as potentially psychogenic, Helen said. The timing is particularly suggestive. Trauma-induced conversion disorders often manifest immediately following or during the traumatic event. The brain essentially shuts down a sensory system to protect the psyche from unbearable input. That's what I thought. But 18 years is a long time. Can it last that long? Absolutely, especially if the initial trauma is reinforced rather than addressed. If everyone around the child accepts and reinforces the disability. If there's secondary gain, attention, protection, avoidance of difficult situations, the condition can become self-sustaining. Secondary gain, Erin repeated. Her father built her entire world around her deafness. Complete control of her environment, her relationships, her exposure to the outside world. Then removing the deafness would mean losing that structure. For both of them, Helen's eyes were shrewd. The father may have his own psychological investment in maintaining her condition. The words settled heavily. Erin thought about Victor Wynn's careful control, his insistence that further testing was pointless, his management of every aspect of Charlotte's life. How would we proceed? If she wants to pursue evaluation. Carefully. First, comprehensive auditory testing, pure tone audiometry, auditory brainstem response, otoacoustic emissions. We need to rule out any organic pathology definitively. Then psychological evaluation, detailed history, possibly hypnotherapy to access blocked memories. And, if it is psychogenic, what's the treatment? That's where it gets complex. We'd need to address the underlying trauma, which means uncovering what actually happened. That can be destabilizing. She'd need intensive support, therapy, possibly temporary medication for anxiety, a safe environment separate from triggering relationships. Her father won't cooperate. Then she'd need to make a choice, her father's protection or her own truth. That's not an easy choice for anyone, let alone someone who's been dependent for 18 years. Erin drove back to the estate with Helen's words echoing in her mind. She found Charlotte and Anders in the cottage, Charlotte sketching while Anders replaced rotted windowsills. The scene was unexpectedly domestic, peaceful. Charlotte noticed her arrival and smiled, setting aside her sketchbook. She wrote, "Did you talk to your colleague?" "I did. She thinks your case is worth investigating. But Charlotte, this won't be simple. If your deafness is psychogenic, uncovering the cause means facing whatever trauma triggered it. Charlotte's hand moved quickly. I want to know. I need to know. Even if it's difficult, there's something else. Your father will likely oppose this. He's invested in your current situation, whether he realizes it or not. He'll say he's protecting me. Maybe he is, in his way. But you're an adult. You have the right to make your own medical decisions. Anders had stopped working, watching them with concern. Erin, are you sure about this? If you're wrong about the diagnosis, then we've done thorough testing and ruled out possibilities. But Dad, I'm not wrong. I've seen too many cases like this. Charlotte wrote, "What do I need to do?" First, we schedule comprehensive auditory testing. Dr. Forsyth can arrange it at her clinic, completely confidential. Then psychological evaluation. We gather evidence before confronting your father. When can we start? As soon as you're ready. Charlotte didn't hesitate. Tomorrow. That evening, Charlotte sat in her bedroom, staring at the faded photograph she kept in her nightstand drawer. 6-year-old Charlotte, mouth open in laughter, caught mid-motion in the garden. Her mother had taken the photo, she thought. Or maybe Mrs. Pemberton. She couldn't remember anymore. She couldn't remember her mother's face clearly either. Just impressions. Dark hair like her own, gentle hands, a feeling of safety. And then nothing. A gap where memory should be. She picked up her journal and wrote, "What if everything I believe about myself is wrong? What if I've been living in a prison I helped build? The thought terrifies me. But staying in the dark terrifies me more." A knock on her door. Mrs. Pemberton entered, carrying fresh linens, but clearly here for another purpose. The housekeeper's expression was troubled. She set down the linens and wrote on Charlotte's notepad, "I need to tell you something. About the day your mother left." Charlotte's heart stuttered. She gestured for Mrs. Pemberton to continue. The older woman wrote slowly, "There was an argument between your parents. You were supposed to be napping, but you came downstairs. I tried to stop you, but you were so quick." Charlotte's hands trembled as she wrote, "What kind of argument?" Mrs. Pemberton's face crumpled with old pain. She wrote, "Violent. Your father was angry, out of control. Your mother wanted to leave, to take you with her. He wouldn't let her. The room seemed to tilt." Charlotte wrote, "What did I see?" "I don't know exactly. I found you in the hallway afterward, frozen, staring at nothing. You wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to your name. Your mother was crying, packing. Your father was on the phone with doctors. Where is my mother now?" "I don't know. She left that day. Your father said she abandoned you both." "But Charlotte," Mrs. Pemberton's writing became fierce, urgent. "She didn't want to leave you. He made her." Charlotte felt like she couldn't breathe. Everything she'd believed about her past, about her mother's abandonment, about her father's protective love, all of it was crumbling. She wrote, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I see you with that young woman, Erin. I see you starting to question, and you deserve the truth. Your mother loved you. Whatever your father has told you, that was true. She loved you." After Mrs. Pemberton left, Charlotte sat in the dark, mind racing. She remembered fragments now, triggered by the housekeeper's words. Loud voices, fear, her mother's face twisted with anguish. And then nothing. A void where memory should be. Had she stopped hearing to avoid hearing something unbearable? Her father's rage, her mother's cries, the sound of violence. She thought about 18 years of silence, of carefully constructed isolation, of her father's absolute control. Protection, he called it. But what if it was prison? What if her deafness was the lock and he held the key? Her phone buzzed with a text from Erin. "Are you okay?" "Still want to do this?" Charlotte typed back, "Yes, more than ever. I need to know what I'm not remembering." She looked again at the photograph of 6-year-old Charlotte, frozen in a moment of joy before everything changed. She whispered to that little girl, even though she couldn't hear her own voice, "I'm going to find out what happened to you. I promise." The auditory testing took place in Dr. Forsyth's clinic, a modern facility an hour from the estate. Charlotte told her father she was spending the day with Erin, which was true, if incomplete. Victor had been traveling frequently, distracted by a complicated acquisition, which made the deception easier. Dr. Forsyth was warm but professional, explaining each test before conducting it. Charlotte sat in a soundproof booth wearing headphones, raising her hand when she heard tones. Except she didn't hear anything. Or did she? Sometimes she felt something, a sensation she'd always attributed to vibration. But the booth eliminated external vibrations. The tests went on for hours. Auditory brainstem response measured her brain's electrical activity in response to sound. Otoacoustic emissions tested her inner ear function. Tympanometry assessed her middle ear. Each test revealed the same thing. Her auditory system was intact and functional. When the testing finished, Dr. Forsyth invited Charlotte and Erin into her office. She displayed the results on her computer screen, pointing to graphs and measurements that meant little to Charlotte. "Your hearing apparatus is completely normal," Dr. Forsyth explained, speaking clearly so Charlotte could read her lips. "Your ears receive sound. Your auditory nerve transmits it. Your brainstem processes it. But somewhere between brainstem and conscious awareness, the signal is being blocked," Charlotte wrote. "So I can hear. Your body can hear. But your brain won't let you perceive it consciously. This is consistent with psychogenic deafness, a conversion disorder where psychological trauma manifests as physical symptoms." The words should have been liberating. Instead, Charlotte felt dizzy, unmoored. 18 years of identity, of understanding herself as fundamentally deaf, suddenly rewritten. "What caused it?" she wrote. "That's what we need to explore." Conversion disorders typically arise from severe trauma, often witnessed or experienced violence. The mind protects itself by shutting down the sense that processed the traumatic input. Charlotte thought of Mrs. Pemberton's revelation, of fragments of memory, shouting, fear, her mother's anguished face. She wrote, "Can it be reversed?" "Often, yes, with proper treatment, therapy to address the underlying trauma, gradual exposure to sound in controlled settings, cognitive behavioral techniques." But Charlotte, this won't be easy. You'll have to confront whatever your 6-year-old self couldn't bear to hear. Charlotte's hands shook as she wrote, "How long would treatment take?" "Months, possibly longer. And there's no guarantee of complete recovery. Some patients regain full hearing, others recover partially. A few don't recover at all, usually because the secondary gains of the disability are too valuable to relinquish." Secondary gains? The psychological or social benefits of the condition. In your case, your father's attention, protection from the outside world, an identity built around your deafness. Losing those things can feel more terrifying than staying deaf. Charlotte absorbed this. She thought about her life, her carefully controlled existence, her father's unwavering presence. Would she lose all that if she could hear? Did she want to? "I want to try," she wrote. "Whatever it takes," Dr. Forsyth smiled. "Then we'll begin. But first, we need to get a complete history. I need to know everything about the day you lost your hearing." That evening, Charlotte confronted her father. She'd delayed it all day, rehearsing what she'd write, how she'd approach it. But there was no good way to accuse your father of lying for 18 years. Victor was in his study, reviewing contracts. Charlotte knocked and entered, her journal clutched like a shield. He looked up, smiling. "Charlotte, how was your day with Erin?" She wrote, "I had auditory testing done." "Comprehensive evaluation," his smile faltered. "What? Why would you do that without discussing it with me?" "Because I'm 24. I don't need your permission." Victor stood, agitation clear in his movements. He signed as he spoke, his hands sharp with emotion. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "That woman putting ideas in your head," Charlotte interrupted by holding up her notebook. "My hearing is physically normal. The deafness is psychogenic. Caused by trauma." Victor went very still. "That's impossible." The specialists were looking for physical causes. No one considered psychological ones. She wrote quickly, "What happened the day Mom left?" "The real story. I've told you the real story. Your mother couldn't handle—" Charlotte slammed her notebook on the desk. She wrote in large letters, "Mrs. Pemberton told me about the argument. About the violence. About Mom wanting to take me with her." "Stop lying!" Victor's face drained of color. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. He signed slowly, "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." For a long moment Victor said nothing. Then he began to sign, his movements heavy with old pain. "Your mother wanted to leave me. She'd been unhappy for years. I was working too much, absent too often. She gave me an ultimatum, change or she'd take you and go. And I couldn't change. I didn't know how. The business consumed me. So she started packing. That day I came home early and found her with suitcases. We fought. It got heated, physical." He looked away. "You saw. You saw me at my worst." Charlotte's chest felt tight. She wrote, "You hurt her." I grabbed her arm, shook her. I was angry, desperate. "You came downstairs. I'll never forget the look on your face. Pure terror." "Of me?" "Your mother screamed at you to go back upstairs. You just stood there, frozen. And then you collapsed. We rushed you to the hospital. They ran tests, found nothing wrong physically. But you wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to sound. The doctors said it might be trauma-related, but He paused. "I wanted it to be medical, something treatable, fixable. Not my fault." Charlotte's hands trembled as she wrote, "So you let them diagnose me as deaf. You let me believe Mom abandoned me because of my disability. You built my entire life on a lie. I was protecting you. If you'd remembered what you saw, if you'd had to process that trauma consciously, you were protecting yourself. You made me deaf so you wouldn't have to face what you'd done." Victor's face crumpled. "Maybe, God help me, maybe you're right. But Charlotte, I love you. Everything I've done." Charlotte stood clutching her notebook. She wrote one final sentence and showed it to him. "Love doesn't steal someone's voice. Love doesn't erase their mother. I'm done with your version of protection." She left the study, leaving Victor alone with his guilt. In her room, Charlotte packed a bag with shaking hands. She couldn't stay here, not tonight. Not while everything she'd believed lay shattered around her. She texted Erin, "Can I stay with you?" "I can't be here." The response came immediately. "Of course, I'm coming to get you." Charlotte spent the night on Erin's couch, wrapped in blankets that smelled of lavender detergent, staring at the ceiling while her world reorganized itself around new truths. Erin had given her space, just sitting nearby with a book, a quiet presence that asked nothing. In the morning, they sat at Erin's small kitchen table with coffee. Charlotte's hands were steadier now, and she wrote, "I need to find my mother." Erin nodded. "Do you know where to start?" "No, my father said she left without a trace. But that might be another lie. Let me make some calls. I have a friend who's a private investigator. If your mother is out there, we can find her." The thought filled Charlotte with equal parts hope and terror. What if her mother didn't want to be found? What if she'd built a new life, one that didn't include the daughter she'd been forced to abandon? What if Charlotte was too late? But she had to know. She wrote, "Please." Over the following days, Charlotte stayed with Erin while the investigator worked. She didn't return her father's calls or texts, though Mrs. Pemberton assured her via message that Victor was distraught, but respecting her space. Anders moved between the two worlds, working on the cottage while checking on his daughter and her unexpected houseguest. "You're good for her," Anders told Charlotte one afternoon when Erin was at work. He'd stopped by the apartment to drop off groceries. Erin, I mean. She's been so focused on helping others since her mother died, she forgot how to let people in. Charlotte wrote, "She saved me." Or she's trying to. "You're saving each other, I think. That's how it works when it's real." Charlotte pondered this. Was it real? The connection she felt with Erin, the way they communicated beyond words, the comfort of her presence. It felt like more than friendship. But Charlotte had so little experience with relationships that she couldn't be sure. That evening, Erin came home with news. The investigator had found something. They sat together on the couch while Erin pulled up information on her laptop. "Your mother is alive," Erin said, speaking slowly so Charlotte could read her lips. "Her name is still Diane Wynne, though she considered changing it. She lives about 2 hours from here. She's been there for 10 years. Charlotte's vision blurred with tears. She wrote, "Does she know about me? That I'm looking?" "Not yet. The investigator just located her." "But Charlotte," Erin hesitated, "she's been trying to find you for years. Legal searches, private investigators, everything. Your father blocked her at every turn. He told her you didn't want contact, that seeing her would traumatize you further. The anger that rose in Charlotte was hot and clean. Her father had stolen 18 years from both of them, had kept them apart with lies and manipulation and money. She wrote, "I want to meet her. Are you sure you're ready?" Charlotte looked at Erin, this woman who'd appeared in her life like an answer to questions she hadn't known to ask. She wrote, "I've been ready for 18 years. I just didn't know it." Dr. Forsyth helped arrange the meeting, insisting on neutral ground and her presence as a professional buffer. They chose a quiet cafe halfway between, scheduled for a Saturday morning when it would be less crowded. Charlotte barely slept the night before. She kept imagining scenarios. Her mother rejecting her, not recognizing her, being disappointed by the woman Charlotte had become. But she also imagined reconciliation, explanation, the return of something precious that had been stolen. Erin drove them to the cafe, Anders following in his truck for moral support. Charlotte's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She wore her nicest dress, had spent an hour on her hair, wanted desperately to make a good impression on the mother she couldn't remember. Dr. Forsyth was already inside when they arrived, sitting at a corner table. She greeted them warmly, then said gently, "Your mother will be here in 10 minutes. Charlotte, I need you to understand that this will be emotional for both of you. There's no right way to feel, no script to follow. Just be honest." Charlotte nodded, her throat tight with nerves. When Diane entered the cafe, Charlotte knew her immediately. She was older than in Charlotte's fragmented memories, her dark hair threaded with silver, lines around her eyes that spoke of years of grief. But her face was Charlotte's face, and her eyes filled with tears the moment she saw Charlotte. Diane crossed the cafe slowly, as if afraid Charlotte might disappear. She stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then Diane signed, "I love you. I never stopped loving you." Charlotte's composure shattered. She launched herself forward, and Diane caught her, and they held each other while 18 years of separation collapsed into this one moment of reunion. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. They sat at the table, Diane's hands gripping Charlotte's as if afraid to let go. Dr. Forsyth provided tissues and gave them space to simply be together. Diane signed and spoke simultaneously. "I tried everything. Lawyers, courts, investigators. Your father had so much money, so much power. He convinced everyone that seeing me would harm you. Eventually, the court ordered me to stop contact. I was told you didn't want to see me," Charlotte wrote, her handwriting shaky. "He told me you left because you couldn't handle having a deaf daughter. That you abandoned us." Diane's face twisted with pain and rage. "Never, I would never. You are everything to me. I remarried eventually, but I never had other children. There was only ever you." They spent hours at that cafe, filling in the missing years. Diane showed Charlotte photos she'd kept, artwork from Charlotte's childhood that she'd refused to leave behind, letters she'd written but never sent because Victor's lawyers had threatened her with harassment charges. Charlotte learned that her mother was an art teacher now, that she'd moved to this particular town because it was as close to the estate as she could bear to be, that she'd driven past the gates countless times, hoping for a glimpse of her daughter. "I have a studio," Diane signed. "Small, nothing like what you probably have. But I kept painting. It was the only way I could feel close to you." Charlotte wrote, "I paint too. Every day. It's how I survive." "Then you're my daughter in every way that matters." Dr. Forsyth eventually intervened gently. "This is wonderful, but I want to make sure we don't overwhelm Charlotte. This is a lot to process." Diane nodded reluctantly. She signed to Charlotte. "Can I see you again soon?" "Yes, please. I have so much to ask you. I have 18 years of questions too." Before Diane left, she pulled something from her purse, a small music box, ornate and clearly old. She signed, "I made this for your 7th birthday, the birthday I missed. It plays the lullaby I used to sing to you. I've kept it all these years, hoping someday I could give it to you." Charlotte took the music box with trembling hands. She wound the key and it began to turn. She felt the vibration, saw the mechanism moving, but couldn't hear what it played. Not yet, she thought, but soon. Soon she would hear her mother's lullaby. Soon she would reclaim everything that had been stolen. 3 weeks after meeting her mother, Charlotte sat in Dr. Forsyth's office for her first intensive therapy session. The room was calm and neutral, designed to feel safe. Erin had driven her, but waited outside, giving Charlotte privacy for this difficult work. Dr. Forsyth began gently. Today, we're going to start exploring the memory of that day. The day you stopped hearing. Are you ready? Charlotte nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd been preparing for this, reading the materials Dr. Forsyth had provided, learning about trauma processing and memory recovery. But knowing intellectually what to expect didn't make it less frightening. I'm going to guide you through a technique called cognitive interviewing, Dr. Forsyth explained. We'll approach the memory slowly, from different angles. If at any point you need to stop, we stop. You're in control here. Charlotte wrote, "What if I can't remember?" Then we try different approaches. Sometimes memories are fragmented or encoded differently. We work with whatever your mind can access. Dr. Forsyth smiled reassuringly. The goal isn't to force anything. It's to create a safe space where your memory can surface naturally. They began. Dr. Forsyth asked Charlotte to close her eyes and think about the house as it was when she was 6. The layout, the colors, the way light came through windows. Charlotte found she could remember more than she expected. The blue wallpaper in the hallway, the grandfather clock near the stairs, the smell of Mrs. Pemberton's cooking. Good. Now think about a normal day from that time. What was your routine? Charlotte's mind drifted through memories. Morning cartoons, playing in the garden, her mother reading to her at bedtime. Simple, happy memories untainted by what came after. Now we're going to move toward that specific day. Take your time. Start with waking up that morning. Charlotte's breath quickened, but she pushed forward. She remembered waking to sunlight, remembered her mother seemed distracted at breakfast. There were suitcases in the hallway. She'd noticed them, but hadn't understood their significance. What happened next? Her mother had told her to play upstairs. Charlotte had heard tension in her voice, a tightness that made her anxious. She tried to be good, playing quietly with her dolls, but then there were voices downstairs. Loud voices. Charlotte's hands clenched. Dr. Forsyth's voice remained calm. You're safe here. You're not 6 anymore. What do you remember hearing? Shouting. Her father's voice angry in a way she'd never heard before. Her mother crying, pleading. Words she couldn't quite make out, but understood meant something terrible was happening. Did you go downstairs? Charlotte nodded, tears streaming down her face now. She'd crept to the top of the stairs, peering through the banister. Her parents in the foyer, her mother with a suitcase, her father blocking the door. I'm taking Charlotte with me, her mother said. Charlotte could remember the words clearly now, as if 18 years hadn't passed. You can't stop me, Victor. Like hell I can't. She's my daughter too. You're never here. You care more about your buildings than your family. I won't raise her alone anymore. Then her father's hand shot out, gripping her mother's arm, hard enough to make her cry out. Charlotte had wanted to scream, but couldn't make sound come. Her father shook her mother, and something fell, the suitcase spilling clothes across the marble floor. You're not taking her anywhere, her father said, his voice low and dangerous. You want to leave? Fine, but Charlotte stays with me. Her mother's face crumpled. Victor, please, don't do this. That's when Charlotte had made a sound, a small whimper of fear. Both parents turned and saw her on the stairs. Her mother's expression shifted to horror. Horror that Charlotte had witnessed this, that she'd seen her father's violence. Charlotte, baby, go back upstairs, her mother called. But Charlotte couldn't move. She stared at her father, at the rage on his face, and something inside her broke. She didn't want to hear anymore. Didn't want to hear her mother's pain, her father's anger, the terrible sound of her family shattering. So she stopped, just stopped hearing. The world went silent, and in that silence she felt safe. Charlotte opened her eyes in Dr. Forsyth's office, gasping for breath. She'd been crying without realizing it, her face wet with tears. Dr. Forsyth handed her tissues and waited patiently while Charlotte composed herself. That was incredibly brave, Dr. Forsyth said. You accessed a very traumatic memory. How do you feel? Charlotte wrote with shaking hands. Like I've been carrying this weight for 18 years and just set it down. That's exactly what happened. Your 6-year-old mind couldn't process what you witnessed, so it protected you by removing your ability to hear. It was survival, but it kept me prisoner. Yes, that's the paradox of protective mechanisms. They save us in the moment but can trap us long-term if we don't address them. Charlotte wiped her eyes. She wrote, "What now? Now we work on reconnecting your conscious awareness to sound. Your brain knows how to hear. We saw that in the tests. But it's built a protective wall. We need to teach it that it's safe to remove that wall, that you're strong enough now to process sound without shutting down." Over the following weeks, Charlotte met with Dr. Forsyth 3 times a week. They used exposure therapy, starting with the concept of sound in completely safe contexts. Dr. Forsyth would show her visual representations of sound waves, while Charlotte felt vibrations through specialized equipment. "We're creating new neural pathways," Dr. Forsyth explained, "teaching your brain to associate sound with safety instead of trauma." Diane attended many sessions, her presence a calming influence. She'd tell Charlotte stories from her childhood, describe sounds from those early years, help Charlotte build positive associations with auditory experience. Erin was there too, supporting Charlotte through the difficult work. Their relationship had deepened into something neither of them fully named, but both acknowledged. Charlotte found herself writing things in her journal late at night. "When Erin looks at me, I feel seen, not as the deaf girl, not as the damaged daughter, but as myself." Is this what love feels like? One evening, after a particularly exhausting therapy session, Charlotte and Erin sat on Erin's balcony, watching the sunset. Charlotte had been staying in Erin's spare bedroom, neither of them discussing how temporary or permanent the arrangement was. Erin reached over and took Charlotte's hand. Charlotte turned to look at her, and what she saw in Erin's expression made her breath catch. Erin spoke slowly so Charlotte could read her lips. "I need to tell you something. I know this complicates everything, but I can't keep pretending it's not true. I've fallen in love with you." Charlotte's heart raced. She reached for her phone and typed, "I love you too. I have for weeks. I just didn't know if it was real or if I was just grateful." "It's real," Erin said, "for both of us." Charlotte leaned forward and kissed her, and in that moment she didn't care that she couldn't hear the wind or the traffic or her own heartbeat. Some things transcended sound. 6 months into treatment, Charlotte stood in Dr. Forsyth's specially designed sound therapy room. The space was equipped with sophisticated audio equipment, comfortable seating, and walls covered in acoustic panels. Today was different from their previous sessions. Today, they would attempt the breakthrough. Diane sat beside Charlotte, holding her hand. Erin and Anders were there too, positioned near the back of the room. Dr. Forsyth had explained that familiar, loving voices provided the best chance of breaking through the psychological barrier Charlotte's mind had constructed. "We've done excellent preparatory work," Dr. Forsyth said, her voice calm and measured. "Your brain has been learning to associate sound with safety. Today, we're going to use your mother's voice, specifically the lullaby from your childhood, as the key." Charlotte's palms were sweaty. Everything hinged on this moment. 6 months of therapy, of excavating painful memories, of slowly rebuilding her relationship with her mother, all leading to this attempt. Dr. Forsyth continued, "The music box your mother brought will play simultaneously. The combination of tactile vibration, visual cues, and the emotional connection to your mother creates optimal conditions for your brain to lower its protective barrier." Charlotte wrote, "What if it doesn't work? Then we try again and again. Recovery isn't linear. But Charlotte, I believe you're ready. Your trauma has been processed. You understand what happened and why you stopped hearing. You're not that frightened 6-year-old anymore." Diane squeezed her daughter's hand, then signed, "Whatever happens, I'm here. We'll face it together." Charlotte nodded. She'd spent the previous night barely sleeping, alternating between hope and terror. What if she could hear? What would her own voice sound like? Music, rain, laughter? The possibilities felt infinite and overwhelming. But also, what if she couldn't? What if 18 years of silence had made the condition permanent? What if she'd come this far only to fail? Dr. Forsyth positioned everyone carefully. Charlotte sat in the center, headphones on but not yet activated. Diane sat facing her, the music box on the table between them. The plan was simple. Diane would sing the lullaby while the music box played, creating multiple sensory inputs. "Ready?" Dr. Forsyth asked. Charlotte took a deep breath and nodded. Diane wound the music box. Its mechanical innards began to turn, and Charlotte felt the vibration through the table. She watched the tiny figurine spin, watched her mother's lips begin to move. Diane sang. Charlotte couldn't hear the words, but she knew them. Her mother had written them out weeks ago. A simple lullaby about stars and moonlight, about a mother's love that transcended distance and time. Charlotte focused on her mother's face, on the love there, the hope. She thought about everything they'd worked toward, about the little girl who'd been so terrified of sound that she'd erased it entirely. She thought about Erin's kiss, about Anders's steady presence, about Dr. Forsyth's patient guidance. She thought, I'm safe now. I'm strong enough now. I can hear without breaking. And then something shifted. It was so subtle at first that Charlotte thought she'd imagined it. A sensation that wasn't vibration, wasn't visual. Something processed differently, something internal. A tone, distant and faint like hearing underwater. Her eyes widened. Diane saw the change and continued singing, tears streaming down her face. The tone grew clearer. Not loud, not fully formed, but present. Real. Charlotte could perceive it not through her skin or her eyes, but through some pathway that had been closed for 18 years. The music box melody, tinny and mechanical but unmistakable, not felt heard, Charlotte gasped, and the gasp produced sound she could partially perceive. Her own breath, her own voice, however faint. Dr. Forsyth was monitoring equipment, watching Charlotte's brain activity on screens. Your auditory cortex is lighting up, she said quietly. You're processing sound consciously. Diane's voice became clearer. Still muffled and distant, but recognizable as voice, as music. As the lullaby Charlotte's mother had sung to her before everything broke. The sound triggered a cascade of memories, real auditory memories, not constructed ones. Her mother singing at bedtime, birds in the garden, her own laughter, music playing somewhere. All the sounds that had been locked away, sealed behind the trauma. But also the argument, her father's shouts, her mother's cries, the sounds that had been too terrible to bear. Charlotte began to sob. The memories flooded through, not just visual anymore, but auditory. She heard the violence in her father's voice, the pain in her mother's, the terrible sound of her family destroying itself. Stay with me, Charlotte. Dr. Forsyth's voice was firm. You're safe. You're not 6. You survived this. The sounds can't hurt you now. Diane moved closer, pulling Charlotte into her arms, still singing. The lullaby was a lifeline, something beautiful amid the painful memories. Charlotte clung to it, to her mother's voice, learning to separate trauma sounds from safe sounds, past from present. Slowly the panic subsided. Charlotte's breathing steadied. She lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and tried to speak. The sound that came out was wrong. Too loud, off-pitch, her vocal cords unpracticed after 18 years. But it was sound. It was her voice. She tried again. Mom. Barely recognizable, but Diane understood. She covered her mouth with her hand, overcome. Yes, baby, yes, I'm here. Charlotte tried to smile through her tears. She could hear her mother, not clearly, not perfectly, but genuinely. The voice she'd been missing for 18 years was finally returning to her. Erin and Anders were crying too. Charlotte looked at Erin and attempted speech again. I love you. The words were clumsy, volume uncontrolled, but Erin heard them. She rushed forward and took Charlotte's hands. I love you too. You did it. You actually did it. Dr. Forsyth gave them time to celebrate before explaining, this is just the beginning. Your hearing will improve gradually as your brain remembers how to process sound fully. You'll need continued therapy, auditory rehabilitation, speech therapy to retrain your voice. It's going to be exhausting and sometimes frustrating. Charlotte wrote, her handwriting shaky. I don't care. I can hear my mother. I can hear Erin. That's everything. They stayed in the therapy room for another hour. Charlotte gradually adjusting to processing sound. Dr. Forsyth played different tones, helped her distinguish frequencies, guided her through the overwhelming experience of sensation suddenly restored. When they finally left, Charlotte felt simultaneously euphoric and exhausted. The world was so loud, so full of input she wasn't accustomed to processing. Car engines, wind, voices, footsteps, all of it bombarding her consciousness at once. In the car, Erin drove slowly while Charlotte sat with her eyes closed, trying to categorize the sounds around her. The engine's hum, tires on pavement, Erin's breathing, her own heartbeat, which she'd never consciously heard before. "How does it feel?" Erin asked carefully. Charlotte opened her eyes and tried to speak. Overwhelming, beautiful, scary, everything. Her voice was getting slightly better already, more controlled. Speech therapy would help, but her vocal cords remembered their function. That night, Charlotte called her mother on the phone, something she'd never done consciously in her life. Hearing Diane's voice through the receiver, intimate and immediate, made her cry again. She was hearing. After 18 years of silence, she was finally truly hearing. The days following Charlotte's breakthrough were a sensory overload. Every sound demanded attention, from the refrigerator's hum to birds singing outside Erin's apartment. Charlotte felt like a newborn experiencing the world for the first time, except she had 24 years of context without corresponding auditory memory. Speech therapy with Erin became a daily ritual. They worked on volume control, pitch modulation, articulation. Charlotte's voice was returning, but it required conscious effort. She had to learn to monitor herself audibly, to adjust based on what she heard rather than what she felt. "Try saying this more softly," Erin would guide her, demonstrating with her own voice. Charlotte would attempt it, often getting it wrong. Too loud or too soft, the pitch wavering. But gradually, incrementally, she improved. Each day brought small victories, a sentence spoken at appropriate volume, a laugh that sounded natural, her name pronounced clearly. Music was revelation and challenge. Erin played simple melodies on her piano, and Charlotte wept at the beauty of it. She'd spent years trying to paint music, to visualize what she imagined it might be. The reality was both more complex and more profound than anything she'd conceived. "This is Chopin," Erin said, playing a nocturne. "Your mother said you used to fall asleep to this." Charlotte closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She could hear the individual notes, the way they built into melody, the emotion threaded through the composition. It was almost too much beauty to bear. The piano's resonance filled her consciousness in ways her paintings had never captured. The depth, the layers, the way sound existed in time rather than space. "Play it again," Charlotte whispered, her voice still rough but audible. Erin played the piece 3 more times while Charlotte simply listened, tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd been missing. This was what her 6-year-old self had locked away to protect her from pain. But not all sounds were beautiful. Traffic noise made her anxious, the roar of engines and honking horns creating a cacophony that felt aggressive. Sudden loud sounds, a door slamming, someone shouting, triggered panic that left her shaking. Dr. Forsyth had warned her about this. Her auditory system was functional, but her psychological relationship with sound remained complicated. "Your brain is still learning that sound doesn't equal danger," Dr. Forsyth explained during a follow-up session. "The neural pathways are reconnecting, but the emotional associations take longer to rewire. Give yourself time. This is completely normal." Charlotte struggled particularly with male voices raised in anger. Even when the anger wasn't directed at her, even when it was just someone frustrated on a phone call or annoyed at traffic, her body would tense and her hearing would momentarily dim, as if her brain was trying to protect her again. "It's a conditioned response," Dr. Forsyth explained. "Your trauma was specifically tied to your father's angry voice. You're learning to distinguish between then and now, between genuine threat and harmless expression." They worked on grounding techniques. When Charlotte felt overwhelmed by sound, she would focus on tactile sensations, the texture of her clothing, the ground beneath her feet, Erin's hand in hers. Slowly, She learned to process auditory input without panic. 3 weeks after her breakthrough, Victor requested a meeting. He'd been texting Charlotte regularly, apologies, updates, requests to talk. She'd been ignoring most of them, not ready to face him. But eventually, she agreed. Part of her healing meant confronting him, meant hearing his voice without the filter of childhood terror. They met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where they could talk privately. Victor arrived early, looking diminished somehow. He'd lost weight, and there were new lines around his eyes. His hair seemed grayer than Charlotte remembered, though perhaps she was simply seeing him clearly for the first time. When Charlotte entered, he stood immediately. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The father who'd stolen her voice, the daughter who'd reclaimed it. Charlotte could see his nervousness, the way his hands trembled slightly as he gestured to the chair across from him. Charlotte spoke, her voice still rough but audible. "Hello, Dad." Victor's eyes filled with tears hearing her speak. "Charlotte, your voice? I never thought—" He couldn't finish. Overcome by emotion, they sat. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. Silverware clinking against plates, soft background music. Charlotte heard all of it, processing the layers of sound while focusing on her father's face. Victor had prepared notes, talking points, but he pushed them aside. When he spoke, Charlotte could hear him, really hear him, for the first time consciously since she was 6. His voice was different than she'd imagined during her years of silence. Smaller, sadder, more human. She'd constructed an idea of how he sounded based on memory and imagination, but the reality was more nuanced. There was weakness in his voice, vulnerability she'd never associated with him. "I've been in therapy," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the table. "Twice a week since you left, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I needed to control everything, including you." Charlotte listened, her hands folded in her lap. She heard the tremor in his voice, the genuine remorse, but she also heard echoes of that 6-year-old's memory, his voice raised in rage, shouting at her mother. "My parents died when I was young, car accident, sudden, senseless. I was raised by an uncle who was cold, distant. I learned that the only way to protect yourself was to control everything around you." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "When your mother wanted to leave, when I thought I'd lose you too, I became the thing I most feared. Violent, controlling, abusive." "You hurt her," Charlotte said quietly, testing her voice in this difficult conversation. "You hurt me, yes. And I'm sorry. Sorrier than I can ever express. I stole 18 years from you, from both of you. I let you believe you were deaf rather than face what I'd done." Charlotte's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "You made me dependent. You kept me isolated. You erased my mother from my life. You built my entire world around a lie because the truth was too inconvenient. I know, and I'll regret it until the day I die." Victor's hands shook as he reached for his water glass. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking," his voice broke, "I'm asking if there's any possibility someday that I could be part of your life again." Charlotte looked at this man who was her father. She could hear the pain in his voice, the genuine remorse. The sound of it was different than reading it in a text or seeing it in his expression. Hearing his vulnerability, his brokenness, made him seem less like the monster from her memories and more like a deeply flawed human being. But she could also hear the echo of that 6-year-old's terror, the violence that had shattered her world. Some sounds couldn't be unheard, some damage couldn't be completely undone. "I don't forgive you," she said carefully, each word deliberate. "Not yet. Maybe never. What you did was unforgivable." Victor nodded, accepting this. "But I understand you better now. I see that you were broken too, that you broke others because you were afraid." Charlotte paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm willing to try. Supervised meetings, therapy together, but on my terms, Dad, not yours, never yours again. Whatever you need, whatever you're comfortable with. And you need to apologize to Mom. Really apologize. Face what you did to her. Victor flinched but nodded. I will. I'll do whatever it takes. They talked for another hour, carefully navigating the wreckage of their relationship. Charlotte heard the nuances in his voice. Regret, shame, hope, fear. Hearing him made the conversation more real somehow, more honest. She couldn't hide behind written words or visual cues. She had to actually listen, to process his humanity along with his failures. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe never fully. But it was honest. It was a beginning. When Charlotte left the restaurant, she found Erin waiting in the car. Erin looked at her questioningly, concern written across her features. I'm okay, Charlotte said, her voice steadier than before. It was hard, but I'm okay. Erin reached over and took her hand. I'm proud of you, Charlotte smiled. She could hear Erin's voice clearly now, warm, supportive, loving. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. That night, Charlotte lay in bed, listening to the city sounds outside Erin's window. Traffic, distant music, people talking on the street below, a dog barking somewhere, the wail of a siren growing closer, then fading. All the sounds of life happening. Sounds she'd missed for 18 years. She wasn't that frightened 6-year-old anymore. She was Charlotte Wynne, 24 years old, learning to hear and speak and live in a world that was finally, fully accessible to her. And for the first time in 18 years, that was enough. 2 months after her breakthrough, Charlotte stood in front of a mirror in Erin's bathroom, practicing her speech. Her voice had improved dramatically. She could modulate volume, control pitch, even attempt singing, though that still felt awkward and unpracticed. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, she said to her reflection, then laughed at the classic exercise. Her laughter sounded foreign to her own ears, but it was hers. Finally, unmistakably hers. She was living fully with Erin now, their relationship no longer tentative or undefined. They'd moved past the therapist-patient dynamic into something genuine and equal. Erin had helped Charlotte navigate the overwhelming world of sound. But Charlotte had given Erin something too, purpose renewed, connection after years of emotional isolation following her mother's death. Today was significant. Charlotte had enrolled in art school, starting classes in 2 weeks. She'd also agreed to speak at a conference on psychogenic disorders that Dr. Forsyth was organizing. The thought terrified her, but she wanted to help others who might be trapped in similar silences. Her relationship with her mother had deepened into something beautiful. They spoke daily, sometimes for hours. Diane was teaching Charlotte to cook, sharing family recipes and stories from Charlotte's early childhood. They were building the relationship that had been stolen, filling in 18 years of absence with presence and patience. Tell me about when I was 3, Charlotte would ask, and Diane would share memories of a bright, talkative child who asked endless questions and sang constantly. You had a song for everything, Diane said during one of their cooking sessions. Getting dressed had a song. Eating breakfast had a song. You made up melodies constantly. Charlotte tried to imagine that version of herself, confident, vocal, unself-conscious. It felt like hearing about a stranger, yet also like reclaiming a lost part of her identity. Victor remained on the periphery. They met monthly with a family therapist, slowly working through layers of pain and betrayal. The sessions were difficult, often leaving Charlotte emotionally exhausted. But they were also necessary, a way of excavating the past and examining it in the light. He'd apologized to Diane in a meeting that left everyone emotionally raw. Diane hadn't forgiven him, might never fully forgive him, but she'd acknowledged his remorse and his efforts to change. He took everything from us, Diane had said afterward, her voice heavy with old grief. But we're taking it back. We're healing despite him, not because of him. Charlotte sat now at Erin's kitchen table, reviewing her notes for the conference speech. She'd written it out, practiced it dozens of times with Erin listening and providing feedback. But speaking in public, using her still-developing voice to share her story with hundreds of strangers, felt monumental. The weight of it pressed on her chest, the responsibility of representing others who'd lost their voices. The vulnerability of exposing her trauma, the technical challenge of speaking clearly for an extended period. Erin came up behind her, wrapping arms around Charlotte's shoulders. Nervous? Terrified, Charlotte admitted. Her voice carried the emotion clearly now, the tremor of anxiety audible. You're going to be amazing. You always are. What if my voice fails? What if I can't get through it? Then you pause, breathe, and continue. Or you stop and try another day. There's no failure here, Charlotte. Just courage. The conference was held at a university medical center in an auditorium that seated 200 people. Charlotte stood backstage with Dr. Forsyth, listening to the sounds of the crowd settling, chairs scraping, conversations humming, papers rustling. 6 months ago, none of this would have registered. Now it was almost overwhelming, a symphony of human activity that her brain struggled to pass. Remember, Dr. Forsyth said gently, placing a hand on Charlotte's shoulder, you're not performing, you're sharing your truth. That's all anyone can ask. Charlotte nodded, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. She'd chosen something simple but elegant, wanting to feel confident without drawing attention away from her message. Diane, Erin, and Anders were in the front row, their faces beacons of support. Even Mrs. Pemberton had come, proud and teary-eyed, sitting beside Diane like family. Dr. Forsyth gave the introduction, explaining conversion disorders and psychogenic deafness in clinical terms. She discussed prevalence, diagnostic criteria, treatment outcomes. Then she invited Charlotte to the stage, her introduction warm. Charlotte Wynne is a remarkable young woman whose journey from silence to voice embodies both the challenge and the possibility of recovery from psychogenic disorders. The walk to the podium felt endless. The spotlight was bright, the microphone intimidating. Charlotte looked out at the faces watching her. Medical professionals, therapists, patients, families dealing with similar conditions. So many people all waiting to hear what she had to say. She took a breath and began to speak, her voice amplified through the auditorium's sound system. My name is Charlotte Wynne. 6 months ago, I heard my own voice for the first time in 18 years. Her voice carried through the auditorium, amplified but clear. She could hear herself speaking, could monitor her volume and pace. She continued, I was 6 years old when I stopped hearing. Everyone thought it was medical, sudden onset deafness with no clear cause. But it wasn't medical, it was survival. She told her story, carefully and honestly. The violence she'd witnessed, the trauma her child's mind couldn't process, the way her brain had protected her by shutting down sound, the 18 years of silence that followed, years of living in a carefully constructed world that was both sanctuary and prison. My father built my entire world around my deafness, she said, her voice growing stronger with each sentence. He controlled everything. My education, my relationships, my exposure to the outside world. He told me my mother had abandoned me because she couldn't handle having a deaf child. That was a lie. He'd forced her away. He'd kept us apart for 18 years. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in her words. Charlotte could hear the quality of their attention, the way even small movements had ceased. It was powerful, speaking and being heard, knowing her voice was reaching them. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because there are others out there living in similar prisons. Children whose trauma manifests as disability. Adults trapped by conditions that might be reversible. Families torn apart by lies and control. Charlotte's voice grew stronger, more confident. If you're a medical professional, I'm asking you to consider psychogenic causes. Don't assume every symptom has a biological origin. Look at the context, the timing, the family dynamics. Ask about trauma. Create safe spaces for truth-telling. She looked directly at the section where she knew trauma survivors were seated. People who'd come hoping to hear that recovery was possible. If you're living with a condition that doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't respond to traditional treatment, consider that it might be your mind protecting you. And know that you can heal. It won't be easy. It will require facing things you've spent years avoiding. But you can reclaim your voice, your hearing, your life. Charlotte's eyes found Erin in the front row, drawing strength from her presence. I had help. I had people who believed in me, who saw beyond my disability to the truth underneath. My mother, who never stopped searching for me. Erin, who noticed what others missed and had the courage to question the accepted narrative. Dr. Forsyth, who guided me through the hardest work I've ever done. You don't have to do this alone, she concluded, her voice ringing clear through the auditorium. I spent 18 years in silence, but I found my voice again. If I can do it, so can you. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And you deserve to be heard. The applause started softly, then built like a wave. Charlotte stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. People were standing, some crying, all moved by her testimony. She could hear the applause, the genuine appreciation in it, and felt tears prick her eyes. Backstage, Diane embraced her tightly. You were perfect. I'm so proud of you. Erin kissed her forehead. You just changed lives. You know that, right? Charlotte did know. She could hear it in the applause that continued even after she'd left the stage, in the emotion-filled voices thanking her afterward, in the stories people shared about their own struggles. A young woman approached her, maybe 17, to say she'd been selectively mute since childhood, and Charlotte's story had given her hope. An older man thanked her for helping him understand his daughter's unexplained paralysis. A therapist asked permission to share Charlotte's story with her patients. She'd reclaimed her voice, and now she was using it to help others find theirs. 3 months had passed since the conference. Charlotte sat in her new apartment, her own place, the first space that was truly hers, watching autumn leaves drift past her window. She could hear them rustling in the wind, a sound she'd learned to recognize and love. Each season brought new sounds to discover, and autumn was particularly rich. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the sharper quality of wind, the way rain sounded different against cooling pavement. The apartment was small but filled with light, perfect for the art studio she'd set up in the main room. Canvases lined the walls, her work evolving now that she could hear. She painted sound, not imagined anymore, but experienced. The visual representation of music, of voices, of laughter, of the world she'd been missing. Her latest series explored the concept of silence versus stillness, examining the difference between absence of sound and peaceful quiet. Art school had challenged and invigorated her. She was taking classes in painting and sculpture, learning techniques she'd never had access to before. Her professors recognized her unique perspective, the way she approached art as someone rediscovering the world. One instructor had called her work a bridge between the visual and auditory, and had encouraged her to develop a full exhibition around the theme of sensory recovery. Her classmates were curious about her story, but respectful of her boundaries. She'd made friends, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. A woman named Iris, who painted abstract landscapes. A man named Felix, who worked primarily in sculpture. They'd invited her to coffee, to gallery openings, to their studios. Charlotte was building a life beyond the estate's walls, beyond her father's control, beyond the limitations she'd once accepted as permanent. Her hearing continued to improve. She wore discreet hearing aids that helped process sound more clearly, bridging the gap between her still-adjusting brain and full auditory perception. Dr. Forsyth had explained that while her hearing would likely never be exactly like someone who'd heard continuously their whole life, it would continue to strengthen as her neural pathways rebuilt themselves. Some sounds still triggered anxiety, raised male voices especially, but therapy was helping her process those responses. She'd learned grounding techniques, ways to remind herself that she was safe, that past trauma didn't dictate present reality. The work was ongoing, but each month brought progress. She picked up her phone and called her mother. The ease of it still amazed her, just pressing a button and hearing Diane's voice, immediate and warm, separated by distance but connected by sound. "Hi, sweetheart," Diane answered, her voice carrying the smile Charlotte could also visualize. "How's your day?" "Good, I finished a new piece. I want you to see it. I'll come by tomorrow. Are you still okay for dinner Friday?" "Yes, I'm looking forward to it." They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, Diane's art students, Charlotte's classes, plans for the weekend. One of Diane's students was struggling with perspective, and Charlotte offered suggestions. They discussed recipes, a new gallery opening downtown, whether Charlotte needed help hanging curtains in her bedroom. The kind of conversations mothers and daughters had been having forever. Conversations stolen from them and now reclaimed with joy and gratitude. After hanging up, Charlotte walked to her easel where her latest painting waited. It showed a woman emerging from water, breaking the surface, mouth open as if gasping for air or preparing to speak. The piece was called Surfacing, and it was about resurrection, about coming back to life after years of submersion in silence. A knock at the door, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones. Charlotte smiled, recognizing the pattern. Erin's signature rhythm, established so Charlotte would always know it was her. She opened the door to find Erin holding takeout bags and grinning. "I brought Thai food and excellent gossip from the clinic." They settled on Charlotte's couch, eating pad thai and green curry, while Erin shared stories from work. A patient who'd recovered speech after a stroke and recited poetry to celebrate. A difficult case involving a child with selective mutism that reminded Erin of Charlotte's journey. The colleague who'd asked Erin out, not knowing she was already in a relationship. "What did you tell him?" Charlotte asked, amused. "That I'm very happily taken by someone extraordinary." Charlotte leaned over and kissed her, tasting coconut curry and feeling profound gratitude for this woman who'd seen her when others only saw disability. "My dad asked about you," Erin said after they'd finished eating. "He wants to know if you'll come to his place for Thanksgiving. He's cooking. I'd love that." "Will your mom's family be there?" "My aunt and uncle, yes. My cousin and her kids. They're excited to meet you." Erin paused. "They know your story. I hope that's okay." "My aunt is a social worker. She was really moved by what you've overcome." Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest. Family, not just the one she'd been born into, but the one she was choosing, building, creating from love rather than obligation. Anders had become a father figure, steady and supportive. His family was welcoming her as one of their own. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Can we meet this week? I'd like to hear about your classes." Their relationship remained complicated, probably always would, but they were making progress. Monthly meetings had become bi-weekly, then weekly. They talked about safer things now. Her art, his work, books they'd read, neutral territory where they could connect without drowning in the past. Forgiveness hadn't come, might never come fully, but understanding had. Charlotte could see her father as a damaged person who damaged others, could hold both his love and his failures in her mind simultaneously. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made him human rather than monster. And somehow that made it possible to have a relationship with him, even if it would never be what it might have been. "How do you feel about seeing him?" Erin asked, reading Charlotte's expression as she often could. "Complicated, but okay. He's trying. That counts for something." Charlotte set down her phone. "He asked if he could come to my art school exhibition next month. I said yes. That's big. It is. But I want him to see who I've become. Not the deaf daughter he controlled, but the woman I am now. The artist, the survivor, the person who found her voice." That evening, Charlotte attended a support group for people with conversion disorders. Dr. Forsyth had started it after the conference, and Charlotte volunteered as a peer mentor. She sat in the circle of chairs, listening to others share their stories, paralysis following accidents, blindness after trauma, voices lost to unbearable grief, pain that had no physical source, but was nonetheless devastatingly real. When it was her turn, she spoke clearly. "I'm Charlotte. I had psychogenic deafness for 18 years. I've been hearing again for 9 months now." A young woman across the circle, maybe 19, looked at her with desperate hope. "Does it get easier? I mean, I want to walk again, but I'm terrified of what that means. Of facing what happened." Charlotte met her eyes with compassion. "It gets different. Not easier exactly, but more manageable. You learn to live without the protective mechanism your mind created. You relearn yourself. And yes, it's terrifying, but it's also beautiful. You discover you're stronger than you knew. What if I fail? What if I can't do it? Then you try again. Recovery isn't linear. Some days you'll make progress, some days you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. But every attempt matters. Every moment you choose to face your fear instead of hiding from it, that's victory. After the meeting, the young woman approached her, walking with crutches, though tests had shown no physical reason she couldn't walk. "Thank you for sharing. It helps to see someone who's made it through." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "You'll make it through too. Give yourself time. Be patient with yourself. And know that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage." Walking home through the cool evening, Charlotte listened to the city around her. Car engines, distant music, people laughing outside a restaurant, a street musician playing guitar, the rhythmic sound of her own footsteps on pavement. 6 months ago, these sounds would have overwhelmed her, sent her spiraling into anxiety. Now they were simply the soundtrack of life, rich and complex and beautiful. She stopped at a small park, sat on a bench under a streetlight, and pulled out her phone. She opened the voice memo app and recorded, "It's November 3rd. I'm sitting in Riverside Park listening to wind in the trees. Someone's playing saxophone a few blocks away. Jazz, I think. Today was good. I painted, talked to Mom, had dinner with Aaron, helped at group. This is my life now, full, complicated mine. I'm not afraid of sound anymore. I'm not afraid of silence either. I'm learning that I can exist in both, that I contain multitudes." She saved the recording, adding it to the collection she'd been building. A diary in sound, documenting her rediscovery of the auditory world. Someday she might compile them, might use them for an audio installation piece. Or maybe she'd just keep them for herself, private evidence of transformation. At home, Charlotte stood at her window with the music box her mother had given her. She wound it carefully and let it play. The lullaby was clear now, sweet and simple, each note distinct. She could hear the mechanical clicking of the gears, the delicate chime of the metal teeth striking the pins, the melody her mother had sung to her before everything broke. She hummed along, her voice blending with the music box. Her pitch wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She was creating sound, participating in the world's symphony rather than just observing it. Her own voice whispered into the quiet apartment. "I found my voice again." And this time she heard herself say it, heard the emotion in her tone, the wonder and gratitude and strength, heard proof that she'd survived, that she'd reclaimed what had been stolen, that she'd emerged from 18 years of silence into a life full of sound and possibility. The world was full of sound, and Charlotte Wynne was finally beautifully, courageously part of it.